We're live on YouTube. We're live on YouTube.
Hi, Brett.
Hi, Janet. Am I upside down?
Hanging from the ceiling? Are you flying in from another, an alternative part of the universe?
I'm in Mexico.
Uh-huh.
It looks like you're from Australia.
I got to do something about this.
Well, you're definitely getting our attention.
I'm going to leave and come back.
Yep. Hi, Martin. How are you?
I am well. I am well. Good to see you, Janet.
Good to see you. There he is, our leader.
Hi, everyone. Now we'll start in a couple of minutes. This is being live streamed on YouTube, so it's good to see everyone.
Vahid, I emailed you. Maybe you saw that. I have a 5-slide presentation. I'll try to keep it really quick, but anyway, that would be more visually interesting. So I guess I can share screen, right? Great.
Vahid, who's speaking first this morning?
I sent it to Jose. I'll send it to you. I'll be speaking first. You'll be speaking after me. But we're live on YouTube right now.
All right.
Good morning, everyone. It's Vahid Razavi with Ethics and Technology. Thank you for attending our fundraiser for victims of war and conflict. This event is very near and dear to my heart. As you can see, this world has got plenty of conflicts that we need to care for refugees and the civilians and the victims of the military-industrial complex and our failed foreign policy. So today we have a set of wonderful guests, but before I introduce each of them to you, I would like to take a minute of silence for the victims of civilians in Ukraine, in Syria, in Yemen, in Gaza, Sudan, but especially Ukraine being invaded by Russia. So please, let's take a moment of silence and we'll resume shortly. Well, thank you. I want to say that the world is really tired of these wars. The failed politicians seem to have no other way to settle our conflicts than to send in generals. The conflict in Ukraine is a sad one. I visited Ukraine and I've worked with Ukrainian developers in my years of working in tech. I was in Ukraine in 2010, and with such lovely people with a rich culture. And to be honest, were looking to be part of Europe. That's how they wanted to be seen. At least that was based on the interaction that I've had with Ukrainians that I got to know over the years. I don't know. It seems like nobody gets up in the morning and says, I want to go and live under a dictator or a tyrant or a theocracy, either being Iran or North Korea or Russia. I mean, except for Edward Snowden, because he's a patriot and he had to leave us and go there. But ultimately, people don't get up in the morning and say, I want to go and live under an authoritarian system. And I think what makes this country great, and I'm grateful for it, and as well as many European nations, is its diversity, its inclusiveness, its the right to freedom of speech, right for the LGBTQ community. Those things matter. The fact that women have right here matters. So, you know, it's a different world under authoritarian regime of Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and Oman and, you know, Dubai and the rest of them, and as well as, you know, in places like, of course, like Russia. You know, I could have never seen myself living there. Zelensky was a comedian before he became president. Today, we don't have any comedians at this event. This is the first time in the past 10 years that we've been doing events that we decided not to include comedy. We're dropping candies, we're trying to do a fundraiser, but the matters that surround us in this world are pretty damn serious. I've asked each of these participants today to take up 5 minutes to share about what they want to share with you as the audience. They can talk about their experience of getting into the military or how they became peace activists, or they can discuss today's politics of war and militarism and its impact in our society. So I'll leave that up to each of them. Our first speaker is a dear friend, someone that I admire, and Reverend Todd Martin Allen is a community leader that we would always love to hear from. He's been a chaplain in the military, and he does that today. And Reverend Allen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Vahid. Can everyone hear me clearly? Good. Thank you. I do believe we're in a serious time. I want to tell you how much I appreciate this gathering. Before I was coming, I received a call from my son, a very rare call from my son this morning. He said he was coming to visit me. So I was glad to hear that. And I told him what I was doing this morning, and he said with sincere words, which he's seldom sincere, he said, I am proud of you, Dad. And he really meant that. I told him what I was doing. I was going to be speaking to a group of people about why I joined the Army and why I got out of the Army. And we would stand together this morning in opposition to war and to the war machine. But last night, I joined with other religious folks in our congregation, and I stood up with them and we said some words that I said, and I believe as I reflected on them, are deceptive. I told lies because we sang a song that said the following: all my life I've been waiting for, I've been praying for the people to say that we don't want to fight no more, there'll be no more wars, and our children will play. Those are high-minded words. But the lie for me is this. The song begins by saying, all my life, I've been praying for this. As I reflected on it, since I spent from 1996 to 2001 as a captain chaplain in the Army, I cannot honestly say that all my life I've been praying that there'll be no more war. Granted, my role as a chaplain, at least I imagined my role as a chaplain, was to be a peacemaker. But what kind of peacemaker trains with the war makers and gets paid by the war machine and does not stand in the front of the tanks as they're rolling to destroy other people, other countries, other places? I was not a peacemaker. As a chaplain, I was blessing the war machine. That's hard to hear because I did stand up for peace, but I was so conflicted, as many soldiers. In fact, I think every soldier every person with a conscience who's in the Army is conflicted about what they're doing. In 2003, just before the war in Iraq began, I marched in the Martin Luther King Jr. parade with a big cardboard sign, bigger than me, that said, "No war on Iraq." Yet when our Army Reserve unit was activated, I put on my uniform, I packed my stuff, I got on the bus, I waved goodbye to my crying mama, just like in the movies, and my two sons there waiting on me as I was going off to war. I went to Fort Benning as we prepared to go to war with Iraq. I actually never went. I did get out at that time of the Army because I did disagree with the war and because I was gay, which is another story. And that's not what we're talking about right now. But this morning, I'm having to ask myself, why did I get in the Army in the first place? I have self-righteously said before, back in 2002 and 2003, I used to say, I agreed with the war in Afghanistan, but I disagree with Iraq. That's what I would say. So self-righteous, thinking, well, we were attacked. The US was attacked, so we had to attack Afghanistan. Little did I know that I was encouraging America's longest war as it began in 2001, 2002. And I was just gung-ho in support of that because I thought it was a righteous cause and somehow different. Destroying people in Afghanistan was different than destroying people in Iraq. So I've had time to reflect on how I was, just like most people in the Army, deceived. So I cannot pray all my life I've been praying that there'll be no more war. To pray for an army soldier headed to kill is to bless war, and that's what I did. But why did I join the army? I want to close with this. Why did I join the army? I think I joined the army because I'm an American. And every year we have a high holiday called Thanksgiving, in which we glorify invasion. And it was beat in my brain. If I was to be a good American, I should join the American Army. It's a part of my identity. It's not a separate choice than who I thought I was. I was trained to be a colonizer. I needed to join the army to colonize other people. And at the time, I thought to propagate religion, of course, which makes it seem somehow justified in a twisted kind of way. The other reason is not just Thanksgiving, but I've been thinking about our national anthem. Every sporting event, we stand as communities and celebrate the words bombs bursting in air. It's a glorification of war. As a nation, we don't have to have that song as our song. We do not have to have it. There's a lot of things. I love the song America the Beautiful. You know, spacious skies, amber waves of grain, not a mention of bombs bursting in air. I suggest we change our national anthem. But the military industrial complex, I'm sure, and all the politicians who have such power surrounded by militarism would fight that very strongly. But that's just another thing. The other reason I joined so I could be more manly. And I don't think I'm alone. I think there's a whole lot of people that feel insecure in their manhood and they think holding a gun. I didn't actually hold a gun, but I did train with the soldiers and hold a gun. But it was the sense of becoming a soldier would help me become a man. I was in my early 30s when I joined, and I still felt I needed to become a man. This is a strong and powerful, deep archetype in the psyche that causes people to join. And lastly, I joined as a chaplain because I thought I was doing good. I thought I could tone down the heat of the war machine, and my prayers and my songs might make a war machine into a peace machine. Needless to say, I was a bit idealistic. People join because they think they can do good. I wore my uniform. My youngest son was one Halloween. He dressed up as an army chaplain, as a soldier, and had the camouflage outfit on at 4 years old. And he would tell everybody, my daddy's a chaplain and he's in the army, but he doesn't carry a gun. And I always think I was so great that I didn't carry a gun. Somehow I was doing good. And then the last thing I want to remember is that I was able to serve as a high school teacher for several years back home. And one of the worst days of my teaching experience is when the Army recruiters came to my campus and they drove up in this semi-tractor trailer that had been converted into a game arcade, and the students were paraded into the arcade to grab a gun, shoot the fake bad guys, walk out of the trailer, and then be recruited into the army. This ought to be brought before the Hague. This is a crime against humanity. And surely it's a crime against our own young people. To tell them that you're going to go play a game and then go in the real army? There were lots of reasons that motivated me to join, and there's lots of tricks that are used to still trick people to join the Army. I do want to close with this last thing. I was watching the news on Thursday, and I felt the flash of wanting to join the Army again. Because I think the last reason that people join is because they really get angry. They're motivated by this desire to stop bad guys, which is not necessarily a bad thing, a bad impulse. But I'm not going to sign back up. I hope they will not take me at my age. But I'm not going to sign back up. I want to keep singing the song that all my life I've been praying for, I've been fighting for, that there'll be no more war. And I can't do that by joining the war machine. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Allen. Glad you're not joining the war machine, but thank you so much for what you do on a day-to-day basis as a chaplain, serving the ones in need in hospice care and elsewhere and long-term facilities. You got a big heart, so keep it up. Our next speaker is our dear friend and advisor, Janet Wheel. Janet and I got to know each other over Occupy and SF 99% Coalition back in the days. Janet, thank you so much for your time, and you got the next 5 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and make you the host.
Thanks so much, Vahid. Thank you, Martin, for your courageous witness, which I know so many people, including women, can relate to. And I am now going to share a very short slideshow of my little journey. And I want to dedicate my remarks today to the very brave Russian anti-war and pro-peace protesters. At least 1,500 protests all over Russia, and continuing resistance within their own highly militarized country, which is really a remarkable thing. And may they all be strengthened and encouraged by the rest of us. So, I'm starting this slideshow with a photo of myself on what is the happiest day that I have experienced thus far as a peace activist. And this was in 2015 in Walnut Creek, California, in front of Representative Mark DeSaulniers' office. I organized a meeting of people to urge him to be in support of what was called the Iran nuclear deal, the negotiations with 5 countries, including the US and Iran, which Trump overthrew, but we were very happy that day. And 31 people turned out for that action. So I, also in honor of Vahid, who's such an inspiration to us, I want to say that peace with Iran and the so far successful efforts to keep the US from directly militarily attacking and going to war with Iran have been really encouraging to me. We can negotiate, we can do other things than go to war, and that's one example of them. And I also want to acknowledge that we are in day 4 of this hideous and very threatening war between Russia and Ukraine, but really the Russian invasion and attempt to overthrow the government of Ukraine. I was one of those children hiding under my desk in school in the early 60s because we were told that in case of a nuclear attack by the Soviet Union, although often people did also call it just Russia, we were to get away from the windows, which of course would shatter, and get under our desks. which would have given us exactly zero protection from the radiation and many other things. It was what we now call security theater. It was a terrorizing drill. And I grew up hating war. And of course, then a bit later, hating the Vietnam War. I also grew up loving nature. And these two, threads in my life are deeply interwoven because, of course, war is the ultimate ecological and climate crime. I'll skip ahead about 30 years. In 1991, I was watching US military vehicles cross the Kuwaiti-Iraq border, and it just hit me in an overwhelming way that I have never forgotten. The money, the fuels, and the military technology that I was seeing on a television screen, and of course, this was being glorified and supported by the mainstream media, as well as, of course, all of the US government. And so at that point, I really dedicated myself to working for peace. And the photo on the left is from the early 20s when I was, it was about 2008, when I was by then a staffer for codepink.org. And we had a campaign, a photo campaign, to have people all over the US make these signs, make blank, not war. And I filled mine in with make music, not war. And on my t-shirt, you can see a little bit of the campaign that I was then helping to run, which was bring our war dollars home. And that is still the message and still the task before us. So peace activism led me to a decade of work with Code Pink. I'm also, sadly, a military family member, and I've long been a supporter and then a lifetime associate member, so non-combat or non-military member of Veterans for Peace. I currently serve on the Climate Crisis and Militarism Project with Veterans for Peace. Maybe I'll have a chance to talk about that a little later. I'm on the advisory board of Ethics in Tech, and the way technology is used and misused has long been of interest to me. And I'm active in my local Portland, Oregon group of Extinction Rebellion. And now more than ever, we are looking at the possibility of extinction. And all of us need to rebel against that. So I'm inspired so much by the prophetic words of the musician and writer Gil Scott Heron. He has a wonderful spoken word piece called Work for Peace. We've got to work for peace. Peace ain't coming this way. We've got to work for peace, are a few of the lines of that lyric. And then I'll just end by quoting what I put on my own bio for Ethics in Tech. The development and use of technology in balance with human needs and environmental limits in a world at peace is my lifelong aspiration. And on the right, we see a photo here from the February 5th protest, which I organized in front of Senator Wyden's office in Portland, Oregon. There was a big banner, USA Addicted to War, with the names of 3 of the biggest war profiteers, parts of the military industrial complex, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and Boeing on it. And we were saying no war on Russia, that the United States cannot engage in a war with Russia, and that NATO's provocations over many years and the lack of attention to Russian security needs is part of what has led us to the brink, and now over the brink into this terrible war that's being waged on Ukrainian land and against the bodies and minds and souls of Ukrainians. And this was a wonderful experience for me because for the first time, it was a bringing together of Veterans for Peace and other peace activists and climate justice activists in Extinction Rebellion. The silence of climate and environmental groups has to end. We have to come together for so many reasons to end the war on nature and humanity, and to join together to work to stop or avert the worst effects, at least, of the climate crisis, and to learn how to live together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Janet. Greatly appreciate it. I'll take over as host. And next, we have our advisor and actually our board member and someone who I've worked with for the past 10 years, has been a great contributor to Ethics in Tech blog and pretty much runs the site. My dear friend, Brett Wilkins. Brett is in Mexico from all places. How are you, Brett? And how's the tequila treating you?
Well, I didn't have any tequila today because I've got to speak here, but maybe afterwards. So sorry for the lighting. I am in a hotel room right now, but hey, good afternoon, everyone. And what can everybody, is my audio good?
Yep, excellent.
Everyone, great to see you again, Reverend, and Janet and Jose and Vahid, and welcome back to all of you who are Ethics in Tech veterans, the only kind, that's a good kind of veteran right there. And to those of you, it's your first Ethics in Tech event, a very special welcome to you too. And as Vahid said, there's no comedians today, and today we speak to you all with heavy hearts and a deep sense of familiarity, because here we go one more time, the horrific scourge of a new war is hanging over our heads again. And of course, my thoughts are with the people of Ukraine who are suffering under the massive Russian invasion and who are resisting it in so many ways, both armed and otherwise. My thoughts are also with all of the other people around the world who are enduring wars, some of them for years or even decades, and these wars that receive far less attention in the US corporate media. Maybe that's because some of those wars are being perpetrated or enabled by the United States under the deadly umbrella of the so-called war on terror. It's never ending, it's worldwide, and it's in 22nd year now. In Yemen, where the Saudi-led campaign that's been waged with US support since 2014, it's the world's worst humanitarian crisis. More than 300,000 people have perished and millions or more are starving as a result of US-backed policies like the blockade, Saudi blockade. And even though the Biden administration promised to end all US support for the Saudi-led offensive operations, the support continues. I mean, arms sales, weapons maintenance contracts, diplomatic cover, it's ongoing. And in Syria, the journalistic monitor group Air Wars has recorded reports of civilian casualties caused by the US-backed so-called Syrian Democratic Forces just this week in Deir ez-Zor, as well as civilians killed by Russian airstrikes in Idlib and elsewhere. And this is, of course, on top of the more than 10 civilians, including at least 6 women and 4 children, who were killed in the US drone strike targeting an ISIS leader earlier this month. And in Somalia as well, the US is bombing al-Shabaab. 60 people were killed earlier this week. And although there were no reports of civilian casualties in that incident, that war-ravaged nation has been enduring nearly two decades of US drone and airstrikes, and it's scores, if not hundreds of innocent lives have been lost. And although the war, I'd say the war is over in Afghanistan, but Biden's talking about over the horizon capacity. That just means more bombs are coming from over the horizon. But even with the withdrawal of ground troops, the freezing of billions of dollars in assets that belong to the people of Afghanistan, it's brought millions of people to the brink of a humanitarian catastrophe. And it's not just the ones that are being waged by the US, but also our clients and allies in Palestine, both in the illegally occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem, as well as in besieged Gaza. Millions of people continue to endure ongoing ethnic cleansing, apartheid, settler colonization, occupation, and many other forms of physical, emotional, and economic oppression. And as Russian bombs are hitting Ukrainian apartments and orphanages and schools, I can't help but think about the US bombing of homes, schools, hospitals, mosques, wedding parties, funerals, and so many other different people and places and countries around the world. And I'm reminded of the fact that since waging the only nuclear war in human history, the US military has killed more foreign civilians than any other armed force on the planet by far, with a death toll in the millions and still growing. And as Black History Month comes to a close, the Reverend mentioned Martin Luther King. I'm remembering his words when he said, when he came out in opposition to the Vietnam War, he said that the US government was the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. And as the world's #1 weapons exporter and as a leading perpetrator of actual warfare, that statement rings as true today as it did in 1967. So yeah, of course, my thoughts are with the people of Ukraine, but they're also with the millions of other people around the world, most of them brown and Black people, who live and die with war as a fact of life, and far too often as the result of policies and actions of my own government, the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. So if we're going to condemn aggression, let us condemn it everywhere. Let us raise our voices against all forms of aggression and say, not in my name, not in our name. We are warriors for peace, and I thank you for all for being warriors for peace.
Wow. Thank you so much, Brett. Whatever you had last night, keep drinking it. You did a great job. No, on a serious note, we need to be warriors for peace. Let's put our politician in the Coliseum, let them fight it out all they want. The only thing they know how to do is to lead with generals anyways. They're no good. They don't do their jobs. In the US, they bend to the corporations and the Lockheeds and the Raytheons and the Boeings. And in Russia, they bend to the oligarchs. And all it is to take advantage of the average Joe. And just like thousands and thousands of Russians came out to street protests, we should not view what takes place in Ukraine as a view of all Russians. There's a lot of people around the world that work towards human rights, that share our sentiment, that view that war is evil, and those that perpetuate it are not part of humanity. Our next speaker is our community leader and activist with Electronic Frontier Foundation. We are a member of Electronic Frontier Alliance, and we're grateful for Jose for taking part in today's conversation. Jose, where are you based right now?
The Northeast, an undisclosed location, as you can see.
What? I thought CIA has everybody's location.
They keep trying to get mine, but they, I'm pretty good at running afoul of them and all of the other law enforcement agencies.
Good.
So thanks for having me, and I'm elated to be a part of a panel of wonderful people who are clearly a part of similar struggles that I've been in my whole life. I'm not going to mostly speak as a member of the Electronic Frontier Foundation until I get towards the end of my comments. I'm mostly going to speak on what Vahid, kind of requested I talk about, and it's going to be bleak. So when I was a kid, the United States invaded Panama for the 20th time. It was the culmination of about 150 years of US military occupation over my mother's country, my mother's homeland, where she was born. And I remember very vividly a lot of stories. I'll try to make it short because I know that we have limited time, but I remember my mother's white passing. We were at a hairdresser and Panama was up on the news, and they, the US news, CBS, NBC, the rest of them were talking about how terrible Panama is, how terrible Noriega was. And I remember the white hairdresser saying, I think we should just bomb it off the face of the planet. And my ma held it tight, and I held it tight as a 7-year-old, and we got to the car and she burst crying before she put the keys in the ignition. Around the same time, Dennis Miller was on Saturday Night Live, and during a weekend update segment where he was trashing Noriega and Panama, he got up with a pair of scissors and he cut Panama out of the map behind him and said, now we don't have to pay the canal fees, to uproarious applause and laughter. I think this genocidal impulse is going to be really important to my comments and to what I'm trying to say here. But we went to Panama. That was my first experience direct with war. As an 8-year-old, seeing my grandfather for the only time I've ever met him in my life, and meeting my mother's other family and the place that she started out her life before she came to the United States. This genocidal impulse was something that followed for the next, how long has it been? 32 years. I remember people saying that we should bomb every other place off the face of the planet that we have engaged, usually in Africa, Latin America, and Asia, right? It has been, Somalia and Haiti and Iraq and Syria and Sudan and Iran, and the list just continues. But this is a very important thing. I think a lot of people in the United States are certainly of conscience and fight back. And we had massive demonstrations against the war in Iraq, certainly. But these are very prevalent feelings that a lot of people have. And I'm still hearing them now as the war in Ukraine is happening, but in different ways. Sometimes it is happening against Russians and Russian Americans, where people are saying we should kick out all of the Russian American students or Russian students. We should take away their scholarships. And in other ways, where a reporter on CBS Live said this war is special and different than other wars because this is a civilized country, as if Iraq and Syria and Somalia and the rest of these countries aren't civilizations who deserve dignity and deserve rights and justice and respect and are part of a global system just as much. So, kind of going back to 1990, we get back to George H.W. Bush, who invaded Panama, and he implemented what became known as Program 1033 in 1990. That was the beginning of a massive militarization of policing in the United States, where they started being able to sell massive amounts of excess military equipment, and weaponry, some of it new, much of it new, to police forces. Now, I think it's the numbers from the Marshall Project and ACLU suggest $7.4 billion worth of military grade equipment and weapons have been given to 10,000 law enforcement agencies across the United States since 1990. Both under Republicans and Democrats. Clinton increased this in 1995 by creating an agency called LASSO, which allows further and faster transference of a lot of this equipment and weaponry to law enforcement agencies. I've been a cop watcher for a very long time as well. I was doing cop watch in the 90s. And then basically until the Ferguson Rebellion, and everybody became a cop watcher with their camera phones. And I remember many times the cops told me something that was very, very similar when they were policing Black and Latinx communities, to the kinds of genocidal impulse that they had, that so many people in this country have about countries in Asia and Africa and Latin America. It was a lot of everybody in these communities are drug dealers. I don't want to continue. I don't want to go on. I mean, we know about the racism of police, but it was a very similar impulse. And these are the people who we are now giving weapons, massive amounts of weapons, as well as vehicles and other military grade equipment and gear to across this country. So there was a little bit of a break. It wasn't a total break. In 2015, Obama put up some restrictions to the kinds of weaponry and gear that could be done. This is not something that we should thank Obama for. We should thank the people of Ferguson and the people who rebelled in uprisings across the country against the police state that they live under still to this day. Of course, Trump, got rid of those restrictions. And Congress reintroduced those restrictions about a year and a half, some of those restrictions, but only a very limited amount around equipment and weapons that are actually not very often purchased by the law enforcement agencies. So we still have this continuing, and despite the fact that the Biden administration has claimed that they're going to reinstitute some of these restrictions, they don't exist. I know that a decent number of you are in California, so I just wanted to quickly comment that in California you also have a state level bill which allows at least transparency. Law enforcement agencies have to document what they have. They have to publicly discuss it, and then the mayors and city councils have to say, yes, you can have more weapons from the military. Yes, you can have more things from this LASSO agency, but it's not enough. The point is that communities should be in control of this, and the answer should always be no. Right? We shouldn't have military grade weapons on the streets of our communities in the United States, and we shouldn't have them around the world. I wanted to quickly end with my own reference to a poet, Yassine Bey, formerly known as Mos Def, once said, "War is a global economic phenomenon, and as long as we have economies of exploitation, we will, and forms of social and racial oppression around the world, we will continue to have war." So thank you very much for having me, and I'm, elated once again to be with the rest of y'all on this panel.
Thank you so much, Jose. The wars that take place are war on civilians, are war on children, are war on a disabled, as war on an elderly. Those are the ones that pay the heaviest price. It doesn't matter if that war takes place in Gaza, in Palestine, in Yemen, Somalia, or Ukraine. Today's headline is Ukraine. We made a commitment globally that Ukraine would not be invaded if they gave up on their nuclear weapons, and we looked the other way. One thing that always bothers me is the fact that we used to have access of non-aligned nations that were active, that would speak against these kinds of aggressions. The East and the West powers and the imperialists on both sides have diluted the power of the non-aligned nations. There's no reason why a country can't be neutral towards the East and the West and be able to live in peace. There's no reason why Ukrainians can say, we don't want NATO and we don't want the Russians, and there should not be threatened by either side. Unfortunately, that's not the case. I don't know how far NATO is going to go. It's probably going to go to the China Seas and claim territorial integrity as if the North Atlantic somehow runs to the China Seas. But, at the end of the day, what concerns me is, as you said, is the militarization of our communities, in addition to what takes place abroad. All the weapons that we sell in the US end up in making places like Central and South America unstable. Those weapons end up in the hand of gangs and thugs in Honduras, in Nicaragua, El Salvador, and then we wonder why we have a refugee problem. We don't allow Ukraine to be neutral, and we wonder why now we have a 4 million refugee problem coming out of Ukraine. We keep selling guns to the Middle East expecting peace. It's just not possible. So my question to you, first and foremost, we started off with giving away candy. What is the nonprofit organization that you think is on the front line that would be where you would put your dollars and efforts into in terms of helping them with their work? Because I think people need some guidance around what they should support. So what would you suggest? Anyone who wants to grab that as a topic? Go ahead, Janet.
I would suggest for people who live in the United States to look at supporting Veterans for Peace, and not only in money, but as I mentioned before, I'm on the Climate Crisis and Militarism project, and we're presenting our slideshow all over the country about how militarism and the ever accelerating climate crisis and environmental crisis are just absolutely interlinked. And this is something that the environmental and climate movement have been completely silent on, very cowardly. And we're finding a lot of interest. And anyway, so if I may, Vahid, I'd like to just quickly share the Veterans for Peace website so that people can just take a look at that. So I'm not even asking for a monetary donation, but if people in other organizations can contact us for a free presentation. It's a slideshow of about 20 minutes, and then we have a very interesting discussion. There's always lots of questions. People almost always say, oh, I never thought of this, or I didn't know about this. Somehow the military, and also the whole huge prison industrial complex and our heavily militarized and heavily surveilling police forces in this country are somehow never talked about, never, let alone confronted by environmental organizations. It's as if they don't exist. Well, finally, that is, that separation and silence is breaking down. But anyway, so, and then of course, there are a number of good organizations that are already raising money to help refugees all over the world, including now the new refugees pouring out of Ukraine. Although frankly, I have to say that while of course those people fleeing in terror to Romania, Poland, Hungary, and elsewhere out of Ukraine need to be supported, the refugees from war in the Middle East and Africa have been much less supported. And, there's a lot more needs. So anyway, but I'll if I may, I'll just pull that up for a minute so people can take a look.
You're muted, Janet.
Yeah, sorry. Anyway, while I'm pulling that up, I'm sure somebody else has something to say.
One of the organizations that I love is Doctors Without Borders, Médecins Sans Frontières, getting doctors on the front line to help people that are refugees. First, you can always trust the medical profession in doing good. Second, they go in places that nobody else does and set up hospitals and field commands, and the proceeds from today's candy drop are going to go directly to them. Jose, you were going to say something?
I was just going to say, and I know this is a bit of a cop-out, but I think that one of the best places always for people to put money is in local groups, right? Especially, for example, in this case, local refugee resettlement groups and groups that do support for refugees and immigrants, as well as groups that most of which are local, some of which are occasionally affiliated with the Quakers and other groups that do counter recruitment against military recruitment. And when I used to do a lot of counter recruitment against the military, we also tried to expand it into counter recruitment against intelligence and law enforcement agencies as well. So I encourage people to look up the local, refugee and migrant support groups where they live.
Great. Thank you, Jose. Go ahead, Brett.
I know it's kind of a hyper-local one, but there's 6 Palestinian humanitarian organizations. I can't name all of them off the top of my head right now that have been labeled terrorist organizations by the Israeli government. And I could think of fewer better ways than to give a big old middle finger to that than to fund those 6 organizations. I also think about groups like Mwatana for human rights in Somalia, Rawa in Afghanistan. And hey, since I'm going to do a shameless self-plug here too. Information is a very important part of combating the forces of evil, and Common Dreams, we're 100% reader supported. We accept no advertising, no corporate advertising. So commondreams.org if you want to give. And yeah.
Well, Ethics in Tech doesn't take any advertisements either, and we have no corporate sponsors. So you are a board member.
I'm a bad board member. Sorry, buddy.
How did you defect to the other side, Brett? Come on. No, it's all good. Common Dreams is a great organization. We're thankful for all the work you do there, and we'll be happy to promote it anywhere we can. In terms of the policy of the U.S. right now towards Russia in terms of ending this conflict, from the International Space Station that's being threatened to a Japanese ship, the tanker that was hit by a missile today. This conflict seems to be growing every day in size and involve more and more global actors. So where do you see it being settled? You know, what is your thoughts on how it's going to get resolved? Brett, any ideas?
I mean, I am no expert on the subject. I did kind of specialize in Sovietology in college, which is really bad timing since I graduated college in the early 1990s as it was all falling apart. But I do remember thinking at that time, actually, that Ukraine is not going to have the territorial integrity that it had when the Soviet Union broke up, that there's going to be some sort of balkanization of the country. Whether or not the people in those parts want to be part of Russia, I feel that some do, but I feel like there's a lot less of that than people might have guessed. But I don't think Ukraine territorially is going to be, the map's going to be redrawn again, just like it was in the 90s. And it's unfortunate. And I don't think Ukraine's going to be brought into NATO, because that would be just a step too. I mean, there are other former Soviet republics in NATO, but I don't know. I'm not an expert on the subject, but I do remember thinking that 30 years ago that Ukraine was not long for the earth as one contiguous unit as it was when the Soviet Union broke up.
Go ahead, Janet.
Yeah, can I just share something, and then I'll real quick, and then I will also say what I heard on the Code Pink organized webinar with Jeremy Corbyn and others from around the world who spoke, because they were offering a way forward out of this hideous conflict. Can I share screen now?
Sure.
Okay, great, thank you. Oh, no, I'm getting the disabled mess. Let's see. Okay, there we go. Okay, just real quick. Here's the website for the Veterans for Peace, Climate Crisis and Militarism Project. And there's our logo. This is what we're focusing on. And then we've got a lot of things that people can do to be in support. And as I previously said, one way is to schedule a presentation, a free presentation for your group about this, and we can somewhat tailor it to the interests of the group. I was on a webinar organized by Code Pink and others earlier today, and Jeremy Corbyn, who should have been the Prime Minister for Great Britain and is a great advocate and leader for peace, made the remark that every war has to end in a political settlement. We need to cut out the fighting and just get to the political settlement. Zelensky, the head of state for Ukraine, has now said that Ukraine should be or could be neutral. I think he's probably souring by every hour that goes by in the absolutely terrible position that Ukraine has been led into by NATO and the US. So anyway, he's saying, Corbyn, but others as well, were saying, three demands. One is an immediate ceasefire to stop the carnage. The second is Russian troops have to withdraw back to Russia or Belarus. And then third, negotiations. Zelensky is calling for negotiations in Warsaw, which I think is a great idea. Now, of course, and then people always say, well, but Putin wouldn't agree to that and whatever. But I think it's our role as peace advocates to articulate what needs to happen immediately. Every day that goes on, not only are people being killed and wounded, but what I'm thinking about is the utter trauma of children that affects them for life. I experienced that a bit as a child, being told to hide under my desk at school and that there might be an atom bomb, as we then called it, that could explode and kill me and everyone I knew. Just that, bit has affected me for the rest of my life. What the Ukrainian children are going through, and children under the bombs and missiles all over the world, is unconscionable. and we should not allow it for a day. So I think that the Ukraine crisis and now the war can be an open door where this is discussed, as Brett so really brilliantly and comprehensively said. This can be an opening to, yeah, no war in Ukraine and no war, period.
Thank you, Janet. I'm going to go ahead and make myself host again. You know, honestly, I don't know what the answer is to these conflicts because we spend billions and billions and billions of dollars in weapons of war. It seems like the only way to get an education in this country is if you got a good family with money, or you go and you work for the military. You know, there is no public education without it. I'm curious, you know, what do we do to prevent the next generation of military men? What do we do to make sure that people don't join it? We talked with online gaming and how military now is all over online games, like platforms like Twitches of the world. We've also talked about, you know, how the military influences the Hollywood filmmaking industry and in terms of the content that they come out with. So Jose, maybe if you don't mind answering, you know, how you see the US military play in online games and online platforms, and, you know, what do we do to make effort to stop that?
Right. We used to do the counter recruitment at all sorts of community events and festivals. And towards the beginning and even a little bit before the Iraq War, that was when they started having arcades set up to play American Army, which was a US military video game, like they had actually owned it and had created it. And I won't say that, you know, I won't say anything about the hackers I knew and how they used to destroy that recruitment effort. But regardless, I think a big part of it is that people actually do have to do the local work of going to schools and going to any community places that the US military sets up and giving a counterexample. In much of the country, it is completely legal for you to demand, for a local group to demand that if the US military is going into schools, that a counter table be allowed. Usually, if you get that relationship with the school district, they will then give you the information too late. Sometimes the military recruiters come without very much notice for the school district in general. So it's a little bit of a hit or miss, but it's the best that you can do. And when it comes to the online gaming atmosphere, there's a lot of people on the left, a lot of people who care about peace, who are now streaming on the major video game streaming apps. So they're responding to these kinds of things, sometimes playing, you know, warmongering games or not. And I'm young enough that I played warmongering games at one point or another, usually ones where you kill Nazis. But, you know, like, I think that it's critically important to support those efforts as well. And I think it's also important to give people place and membership somewhere else. I think the labor movement is the central one that I think of. I think thinking of people as union members gives them a sense of identity and a sense of connection to other people that they then don't need to seek out from the military. And I think it's similarly, you know, we have to kind of break up the idea that we need to find some masculinity, some connection to our masculinity, especially like white Western masculinity, through something that is based on might and violence, and kind of create social movements with membership, community organizations and tenant organizations with membership, and unions with membership, that really give people that kind of sense of self and sense of identity and connection, instead of, you know, the weapons of war.
Right. You know, one of the things I want to highlight is a couple of the videos that you've done in the past. One of the important ones was Big Tech Sells War. It's not just on the Twitch platform, but companies like Amazon that host $900+ million worth of CIA infrastructure, or work on Jedi contracts, or work on defense contracts, they're in the business of using cloud computing and other technologies and killing people. And that's where they make their money. So it's not just Lockheed Martin and Raytheon and Boeings of the world. It's Microsoft, it's Amazon, it's Jeff Bezos who's profiting from it. And this is the reality of it. You know, it's what I always say is, Jeff is not the guy that just brings you milk and honey. He also sells to every damn defense contractor and builds infrastructure with them. So know where you're investing your dollars and whose shares you're buying. I want to say a couple of final words, and that is, we're going to be sending out candies next week. So expect your candy and fudge. The money we raise today will go to medical Doctors Without Borders. They do a great job. And if there's other organizations you guys think are worthy, let us know, and we'll do additional fundraisers in the future. I want to thank every single one of our speakers, Reverend Allen, Janet Wheel, Brett Wilkins, Jose from EFF. And thank you so much for being a part of it. And thank you all for listening to us and hearing us out and contributing to this fundraiser. Hopefully it all adds up to something that can be measurable. But if you like to donate additional funds, please go to Doctors Without Borders and make a donation. Ethics in Tech is 100% supported by people online. So if you'd like to make a donation to us so we can keep doing what we do, please keep that in mind. It would be greatly appreciated. And as always, we look forward to hearing from you and seeing you at our next event. So with many thanks, I want to especially take one more second of your silence for people that are victims of war and conflict around the world. As we end today's session, please keep them in your mind and in your prayers. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll be in touch soon. Bye-bye.